Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank the chair for the introduction, and also I'm very happy to have this opportunity to present my work. My work is about tracking neural adaptation in motor brain-machine interfaces. There are several different names here. So basically, I want to talk about some computational issues in the area called brain-machine interfaces. This is a totally new area, but I want to show you that the mathematical analysis actually play a very important role in this area. So first, let's start with give you some idea about brain-machine interfaces. So I guess it's kind of new to most of the audience. That's why I copy. This is from YouTube.
In this paper, two people with tetraplegia, and it's two people who were unable to move their arms or their legs in any functionally useful way, were able to control a prosthetic or a robotic arm simply by thinking about the movement of their own paralyzed hand. And they did that using the investigational brain-gate neural interface system. So they thought about using their own arm and hand as though they were reaching out themselves with their own limb, and the robotic arm moved much the way their own arm would have moved. One of the long-standing questions, not only in neuroscience, but in neurorehabilitation, is whether the cells in the motor cortex and other parts of the brain, whether they continue to function the same way years after that original injury.
Okay, so this basically gives you an idea about brain-machine interfaces. That patient has been paralyzed for 15 years, so she cannot control the arm to move, but her brain is kind of intact. So that's why scientists put the electrode inside her brain, and of course with her consent, and analyze the data in real time and use this data analysis results to control the external device, basically finish what she wants to move. So apparently from this paradigm, we have a very clear understanding about the importance of the data analysis here. And also at the end of this kind of the video, that scientists also raise a very important question: is all this brain signal stay stationary for years and days, all this over time? So let's bear this question later, but let's first start to understand about the definition of the brain-machine interfaces. So basically, it's a direct communication pathway between brain and external device. So we're aiming to assist, augment, or repair the human cognitive sensory motor functions. So if there is something wrong with part of the brain, we want to develop this kind of prosthesis to replace the functionality of part of the brain. Like you have seen that patient cannot move, so we can design this prosthesis to replace her ability to move, or basically help her. So apparently, this is an interdisciplinary area. So this area, brain-machine interface, is actually an area called neuroengineering. Of course, you see there are knowledge. We need the knowledge of neuroscience, like the brain and clinical trial. It's on human. And also about the material to design the electrode to collect the brain signals. And also about electronics to acquisite and amplify the signal in a way that we can process it. Of course, about information theory and math, that's for sure. So today I'm going to focus more about the data analysis in this area. So from this point, we want to give a paradigm like how this thing actually works. So this is a paradigm of the whole system. So this is the brain of the patient. We put some electrode inside the brain and get the brain signals, and then we monitor the brain signals and do some signal processing, data analysis, and machine learning. But everything are supposed to do that in real time. So in that sense, we output something called control command, basically reflect this patient wants to move somewhere with a certain direction and velocity, all this kind of information. We output that to the external robot. And this is basically what we can see, but actually there are more informations towards feedback to the brain. Let's see later what is exactly that. But here we mainly focus on the visual and audio feedback, so we don't directly touch on the brain without patient consent. All right. So about the brain signals, I want to give a brief introduction where the signal is and how the signal looks like. So this is our brain. Actually, in our brain, on the top area, there are some area who's responsible to the movement. So here this is a scalp, this is our bones, scalp, and we put electrode, which is quite small, inside our brain. Of course, it involves some surgery complications, but of course, this will not be done until the patient is paralyzed and totally volunteered to do that. This is like last option, like not healthy people, all right? So this is the size of the electrode. It's only like a 4 millimeter by 4 millimeter. So in terms of opening of the wood, it's quite small. And we are collecting something we call single neural activity right here in a dimension about 200 micron. And this will record the electrophysiology signal, like how the neurons fares. Like if you give the video and to this kind of a signal and play this like audio, play this as audio, you will hear the brain signal fares like this kind of the code. And because of the design of the electrode, we have a high spatial temporal resolution and also the high throughput of the information. So that means the data we're recording actually has more, probably may have more than what we need. And we have no idea which neuron actually plays an important role in this kind of like a movement intention. And we have identified that. And more than that, because we can record it up to 200, 300 neurons at the same time, and each neuron fares in a time resolution about 1 millisecond. That means this is totally high-dimensional, redundant data. And we have to process it in real time and make sure that our processing and analysis is accurate enough. Okay, so that's a first impression about the challenge. But actually, this is solved at the initial time, which is 1995. A very simple way is just because a neuroscientist trained a monkey to do a center-out task, which the monkey is trained to move this joystick towards one of the 8 directions when there is a light on. That means that's the target. At the same time, this kind of recording is done inside the brain, inside the monkey's brain, and this is one neural response. So this is 8 different directions, so the monkey can explore all the possible directions. And here, X is the time, and Y is the trials. So that means for a certain direction, the monkey can try several times. And all these dots is the neural signals. And you can see some patterns here. And this neuron actually have its preferred direction, like towards 180 degree. On the opposite direction, this neuron is not active. So in that sense, this statistic property can be characterized by a Gaussian kernel, basically a mean and variance, because I think most of the audience has a mathematical background. I'm not talking about the model here. But the thing is, for a neuroscientist, it has a very intuitive, strict view about how the single neuron related to the macroscopic behavior data. All right? And they developed something called population vector. So basically, for all the mathematical background audience, I believe this is very simple. It's just each of the neuron has its own like tuning function, like that is a Gaussian with a certain mean and variance, because each neuron have their different mean and variance, and you calculate that as a preferred vector. And you add them together by just a simply normalized weighted averaging. And this actually gave pretty good results to show the feasibility. It is possible. We can do this. So this gave you the idea about, it's not playing. Okay, so basically, I'm not going through this because this is too simple. This is all the neural recorded up to 200, 300 neurons. And for each blue direction, it gives you the preferred direction. And the length of the vector just indicates in real time how the neuron is activated. Of course, the length should be very different. When average them together, the decoding results of like the interpretation of where the patient wants to move actually is pretty good, but not always good. If you're only using this very simple like linear averaging, you probably will only get results for certain days out of 1 year. This is because our brain is totally nonlinear and infers the intention from their experience, and their experience actually changes over time. All this nonlinearity, all this Bayesian inference, and all this non-stationary is not a concern in the very preliminary part. So we have to address all this kind of issues in the later processing to make sure that this instrument, this calculation can be used for daily application, not just for 1 year, like 1 or 2 days out of 1 year. Okay, we bear this question in mind. I would like to introduce this part of the information flow, in that in that video, we only see that robot is actually moves as executor. But actually, scientists are working on this area to make sure this robot has ability to feel. This is because we have our arm to move wherever we are, but we also have ability, the tactile sensory feedback to feel about the surface, about the temperature, about the pain, about the texture, and this actually helps us to make sure our movement is better. So this is also necessary to design such a neuroprosthesis to make sure that all this robot hand has bear or inherit partially of the human properties. This is also possible, and I'm not going to play this video. This is online, and this patient is paralyzed for some year, not that long, and his eyes is totally black out. Covered. And this is a robot hand. And when this doctor touched one of the robot hand, this patient can actually tell which finger is touched. So basically, it is enable a sense of a touch for this paralyzed people to make sure that the information of the tactile sensory feedback goes back to the brain. So the patient can recognize, okay, one of the finger has been touched, but actually he's paralyzed. So up to that point, they're actually bring the problem. Well, actually, up to that point, we see this information is able to decode it from the brain to the executor, and the executor also feedback the information back to the brain. Now, the things become very complicated because the information flows in real time. In real time means every time the robot hand moves to somewhere which is not as I expected, the brain responds in real time. That means in milliseconds to correct it. So this kind of information change happens in every million seconds to make sure that this would be a co-adaptation from the brain to the external algorithm. So in that sense, if your algorithm is fixed, static, just decode whatever you train from the previous training, all these kind of things. The reality is very brutal, is that you have to recalibrate this neuroprosthesis every day. So this makes no sense for the real application. There is no way you send a very professional guy, go to the patient and say, okay, today let's start a recalibration for half an hour. And the next day you would do that again. So in no way. So that's why we have to design some algorithm to understand what is going on inside the brain, as long as some changes happening and how the brain actually react to such a change. So in that sense, now the system become a co-adaptive system. The plastic brain and also the algorithm, non-stationary algorithm, should track about the changes, adapt to each other at the same time. So this actually refers to a very important question, as we also mentioned in the video at the last. That scientists raised a question that the brain actually changes over time, days and days, years after years. This is something called neuroplasticity. To understand is, in a very simple way, macroscopic view, we could know that we can learn different movements, different techniques, and also when the patient get some stroke, cannot move some of the limbs after the rehabilitation, partially the function can be regained. So this is an intuitive understanding about the neuroplasticity. So basically, what we know about the neuroplasticity is that the brain is a non-stationary system. It changes to adapt during the interaction with the external environment. So basically, to make sure that meets our needs, what we want, we try to make it happen. And this reflects to the single neural behavior that I call it is about behavior level. But for the single neural activity, we talk about this statistic neural tuning, like every neuron has a preferred direction and fare more actively towards that direction. This actually changes over the days. So you can see this is a different day. The day 1, this is day 15, and this neural tuning emerge, and some neural tuning just disappear. And this is direct evidence that in the microscopic level, the signal you're getting is actually non-stationary. And this is over days. And sometimes, even within, this is 600 trials, about 20 minutes recording, this changes actually also happens. So from the different control mode, one is you can control, for the monkey, you can control the external device by move the arm at the same time, which is relatively simple. The other way is totally called brain control. Brain control means we just bound the monkey's limb. Does not allow the monkey to move. Just ask the monkey to think. This exactly happens for the real patient because the real patient already paralyzed. For these two different control modes, the neural tuning function actually also changes within 20 minutes. So this are the evidence that all the data is actually non-stationary, and they could change gradually over days and also abruptly within minutes. So that's why we're talking about developing the signal processing method to solve this kind of a question. So we have to face the non-stationary problem inside the brain and make sure that when we apply this in the real application, we don't have to do the daily calibration. So your algorithm can follow this change just automatically. And as long as you train the first day, next day, they just adaptively follow the change. And you don't have to send a person for the customer service. At the second level, we want to understand about the neural tuning, because this seminar is totally about predictive coding. So that's why we want to know for the microscopic level, for the single neural tuning behavior, that kind of skill, can we predict neural tuning? Predict the neural tuning statistics wherever the direction this neuron actually prefers actually changes. And certainly, we want to bear all these ideas from analysis on the real data to design something called brain-inspired robot. So this actually is from the different skill kind of tell you that the brain can actually learn new things, and we can follow that. We can track that. And this property would help to design some new robot. It's not like just an executor, but have an ability to learn as a brain. All right. This is I'm talking about starting from the translational part is to make sure that all this tracking is all this non-stationary brain signal can be tracked to make sure that the performance of our neural prosthesis is stable. So the first thing is that we have to know for the real patient, there is no supervised trajectory. There is no true live movement to train your machine learning model. There is no such a thing. So you have to try, right? And the second thing is that this is totally nonlinear brain, and we want to make sure that there is no daily calibration And also important, we have to make sure that you're not just selecting very smart subject. You make sure that this can be applied for every subject. Make sure that your algorithm is smart enough to track the changes. Okay, so we developed some reinforcement algorithm to apply this on the brain data, which is collected from the monkey. The monkey is actually do something, control the joystick to do obstacle avoiding task. So this is obstacle, this is start point, this is final points target. So the monkey does not know what all this color means. So all he has in hand is that kind of a joystick. So how the monkey learns about the target, a task, is because the monkey tries. Every time you move this joystick, the circuit changes their location. As long as the obstacle is hit, there is no reward. You have to reset, right? Then finally, after the trial and error, the monkey kind of figure out, all right, I have to avoid this obstacle and finally reach the target. This is exactly the learning process. The learning process actually is reflected in the non-stationary brain signals. And then we developed the algorithm to exactly figure out how this brain learning happens in time. So we basically transfer the high-dimensional neural data, as I mentioned, like 200, 300 neurons, and first at 100 millisecond level, all this high-dimensional data into the reproducing kernel space. So basically, you put your kernel on the original data, and this will, of course, there can be different kernels. You project this in the reproducing Hilbert space, and then a good thing about this, we just linearly combine all of them. Linearly combine, and this will generate some option of the movement. Then we randomly select the action to make sure that we explore all the neural states and action space. So this is basically like a reinforcement learning. As long as some of the action gets the rewards, happen to avoid the obstacle and reach the final target, we will award all the connections that links to that winning nodes. All the others remains the same. So this is somehow like a neural network structure, but it's actually not. There is no multi-layer, and the good thing of projecting into the reproducing kernel space is that it's highly likely with any initialization, because of the linear combination, you will get a global resolution. And this is very important for the real application, because when you deal with animals, the animal will not try as a robot forever. Okay, I try this, I try that, I can try days. Actually, when an animal tries about 5 minutes, basically quit. That requires your algorithm need to be very, very fast to interpret the mapping from the neural activity to the actions. Very fast, and also because this rewarding and updating of the weights actually continues for every millisecond. So in that sense, we are able to follow, if the ground truth, the mapping from neural activity to the action actually changes over time. And more than that, on the design of the algorithm, we make sure that we will augment the learning. That means if some unexpected action, the action with very, very small probability but happen to get the rewards, this is totally unexpected, we will augment and update the weight tremendously. So in that sense, we speed up the learning. All right. This is the results. This is real movements for the comparison, and this is exactly the procedure indicated as a very naive agent, how this agent learns as exactly as a monkey. Right, at the very beginning of the training, this solid line is true movement, and this dashed line are the agent movements. So at the very beginning, it cannot do all this kind of actions, basically don't know how to avoid obstacle, don't know this is a target. But after some time, you will see, okay, it tries, some of them can reach the target and finish the task, some of them cannot. And finally, it figures out very, very efficient way to just go straight forward and avoid this obstacle and reach the final target. This is exactly showing the how the brain figures out, okay, during the learning, how I adapt my brain signals, and my agent can follow this learning, exactly repeat the learning procedure. And one thing I want to mention that for this dashed line is the agent performance is not exactly like the true movement, which is curvy and smooth. This is more like a straightforward. This exactly shows this is the reinforcement learning for the agent to try. They can figure out their own way to make sure this is efficient. It does not have to be exactly like the brain. But the most important thing is that the most important thing is that this is our algorithm. This is over time. Our learning speed is quite fast, and for the shadows here is different initialization, and our performance is quite stable, and the variance is always very, very small. But all the other algorithms from the different initial algorithm can be pretty bad because they don't have this always drop into the global minimum property, and this is actually bad for the real cases. And one important thing about this is we always talk about like a daily calibration. It happens. It actually happens for the red line. If we don't do the daily calibration, that means for the first day we train a model, and next day we directly use a model. Let's see, all these red bars just change dramatically. It's not always bad. Sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's pretty good, but this is something we don't want. We want our prosthesis performance. It's very stable, and this is our algorithm. This is constantly good over a week. All right, and also for that 20 minutes adaptation from the manual control to the brain control. That means without moving your real arm, you just think about this and move the robot through the trial and error. This is the brain control part. This is the manual control part. For the manual control part, everything is good enough. The accuracy is about 90%. And when we bear the same model that assume that brain is not changing when you switch to the control mode, the performance actually drops greatly. But if we do the adaptation, the algorithm, after very, very fast learning, can back to something is acceptable, because this thinking about moving is very, very different and difficult than just moving your real arms. All right. The second thing is about prediction of the single neural behavior. Like, we know that it changes over the time. It changes over the time. It's observation. How are we going to follow that? So the idea is we use the Bayesian inference. So this is our observation of the brain signals, and this is our neural tuning. This is a movement. From this point, this is called decoding. That means from the brain signal observation, we can infer the movement state. So think about the Karman. It's something like a Karman, but the thing here is the neural tuning function is totally nonlinear, because we know the brain is nonlinear. But actually, more than that, we want to not only decode real movement, but also decode the changes inside the brain. That means the statistic of the preferred neural tuning property actually also changes. Can we predict that? And the idea is quite pretty simple. It's use the sequential Monte Carlo estimations, not only on the movements, but also use a dual framework to estimate the changes in the parameterized neural tuning functions. So that means, okay, if the changes over the time, we want to estimate the movement for one step. After several steps, I will re-estimate this neural tuning. But here, it's very, very different. It's not recalibration, because the recalibration needs the real movement to recalibrate that. The truth here, we estimate the changes in the neural tuning based on our estimation. So everything is actually inferred from the observation. There is no ground truth of the movement used for the calibration. So we tested on some neural data when the monkey is trying to move the joystick for the random tracking. And this R2 neurons changes from time 0 to some time later. And all these blue curves are the neurotuning curves that they are exactly the same across time. All right, so you will say, okay, this neurotuning curve is not exactly like you show about the Gaussian kernel. We just change a little bit. It's just because we fold this neurotuning symmetric form with the inner products, the biggest value to the smallest value. So here is the biggest value of the inner product, the projection, and this is the least similarity. Basically, you fold it symmetrically of that Gaussian curve. So you will see only this monotonically increasing curves. And the red line is the ground truth, and the blue line is our estimation. So you will see the red line is different, start to be different after some time with time zero statistics, and our algorithm can, this is the last, Our algorithm can predict the single neural behavior. Why does it matter? Because we know it is something going on inside the brain. Once we can dig this information, track this information, will contribute to the reconstruction of the movement. That means the control of the prosthesis. This is the ground truth. This is our method. This is other non-stationary method, already good enough method. It's like stationary comparing to non-stationary. So I will skip the last part, but the basic idea is that the analysis on the real brain about how the brain changes, how the brain pattern signal changes over time, and if we can track it, we can make sure that we follow the learning. This idea is exactly implemented in some system that to mimic that our 3D perception actually is developed over time. When we were a kid, we don't have this 3D reception, and after some years, we developed this. This enables us to use our eyes, track some object moves in the depths. And we apply this algorithm exactly on the robot system to mimic that, okay, this robot cannot track some object move in the depths, and after some time, it is able to track. This exactly follows how the brain is analyzed during that learning. All right, so this is the last page, and we have been using the data analysis method to make sure that our brain processes is able to use for a very long time without daily calibration, and we can go in more details for the neuroscientists to investigate how the single neural signal changes over time, and this helps us to develop some robot have more intelligence. This brain area, neural area actually is very, very broad area, and we are only doing partially of this part about the motor rehabilitation, and we hope that it can be later applied for many different cases, like recovering your vision, your touch, restore your memory, and help with like DBS, Parkinson kind of a disease. So thank you. That's it.
All right.